It's okay.
First of all, I want to apologize for getting later over here, but I worked a long time this night and go for a nap, yes, no. I said yes, and then it was a little bit more than that. Now, I had prepared my presentation before that nap, so it should be ready now. Compressive osseointegration. Now, osseointegration, we have heard that yesterday already, that titanium is quite important in achieving that. And we've seen that before. If you use titanium implants, even screws and plates, we very often see, and I'll mark a few ones, that you see the bone going up along that titanium. So we know that it happens. It's shown already also in teeth implants. So titanium and bone, that's a good couple. Now what does add the compressive force? We have seen these slides already, that scheme of how it works. By tightening the nut, you compress the bone and you load it immediately on the cut surface, which induces new bone formation, and by inducing new bone formation, enlarging the seating, and also by the design of that footplate, as I call it, it's rotational stable, and it stays like that, as we will see later on. Now that compressive force, we've seen 400 pounds, 600 pounds, 800 pounds. I've always had a problem because in Europe you use a metric system. Officially we should use newtons, that's in newtons, but that's in kilograms, which we are used in Europe. So that's quite high forces, and we apply that in patients. I have often very young patients who weigh only 35, 40, 50 kilograms, less than 100 pounds. So the initial force is already very high. So we need a good bone to put it on. So most of the time it will be said it's cortical bone, although maybe now we are going sometimes also to metaphyseal bone of sufficient length to put in the anchor plug, and we rely on a biological process. So it should be viable bone with, if possible, I try to do it, keep that periosteum around it, just to the osteotomy site. Previous irradiation, I think, is an absolute contraindication. And if you plan to have post-operative irradiation, especially in oncology, let's say for Ewing sarcoma, then maybe it's not a good idea to use it, unless that will be later on, although the ingrowth also is delayed by using chemotherapy. And which is important is that we have a stable initial fixation until ingrowth occurs. The moment you have ingrowth, you have rotational stability, and probably everything will be okay. Now my series, it's a little bit smaller, less than half than from Richard, but it's already over several patients over a follow-up of 10 years. So it's 85 compressive devices in 73 patients. Only one used in the humerus, all the other ones were in the femur. And there were two with an intercalary femoral replacement, a custom-made prosthesis. So it means in 2 patients, 2 CPS at the same time. 17 were in the proximal femur combined with a hip prosthesis, 64 in distal femur with a knee prosthesis. And the age is between 10 and almost 70 years, so it's age independent. Now, we've seen mechanical failures. I have seen a few, and this one was my first, and it was a bad judgment. It's more than 10 years ago. It was a loosening of a cemented prosthesis at 15 months after implantation. No signs of infection, normal set rate, all cultures were negative and didn't have any sign of infection afterwards also. I don't know what happened, probably bad cementing technique of me. But it loosened in 15 months, and I tried to save as much as bone as possible, and probably my cut wasn't high enough. He walked almost immediately after surgery, although I'd said he had to use 2 crutches, and that at 8 weeks, that was the result. So you need good bone. But if you have that problem, remember that that's a small dot of cement, which is also from the first surgery, which came through a nutrient foramen, which is at that height. We'll see that later on. He was revised at 1 week. You still see the pinholes. I put the pins in the perpendicular direction. At 1 year, at 2 years, there's some lucency between the footplate and the bone, but there's no seating of the sinking of the nozzle to the anchor plug. So it looks as it being Okay, that's that little dot of cement. So we didn't remove very much of bone, although now we have a stable fixation. Or it's something that looks like it. At 2 years he was caught in a fall. He had a fracture over there, and a colleague of mine put in a DHS without a sliding hip screw without any problem. And now we are at 8 years without any problem. So you can solve the problem with the same system, which isn't true for all other, or most of all other systems. Another mechanical failure, typical one, which we see very gradually, is at 1 week everything is okay, but very gradually in the weeks and months afterwards, you see some sinking. It's the only one in which I've seen a migration of a pin, but at 2 years it's completely collapsed. That nozzle is against that anchor plug, and the moment you lose that distance, you lose compression force. That was in the lateral view. In the AP, you see this happening. And what you have is, even at 2 years, it's an hypertrophic non-union. So what can we do? We can use the same system. Just remove 1 centimeter, put in a large, because you have much bone now, you have strong bone. Put in rotation pins in this case also, because I could. And at 1 week, everything looks okay. At 2 years and 6 months now, everything looks okay, no seating, very stable fixation. So the bone, and I have even the impression that in revisions, the ingrowth even goes faster than the primary ones, especially if those got chemotherapy. So it's just waiting for a stable fixation. Now we have had in total, I think, 6 patients who needed a revision for mechanical failure, which holds for all of the series a survival of 90%, because lots of patients walked on it until they say, well, it doesn't feel comfortable. It's up to 5 years after initial implantation that I had to do the revision, but they say immediately afterwards, wow, this feels good. It feels a lot stronger afterwards. The same holds in infection. It has been said already yesterday. This is an infection, I think it was quite early, about 6 months after surgery. Although there was already ingrowth, it was not possible to remove that spindle like that, so you had to cut the bone, but I just cut 1 centimeter, the maximum is 2 centimeters. Only the first one I had to remove 5 centimeters. That's immediately after surgery, in a stage revision with the cement spacer, and that's at 5 years after that. Unfortunately, at 5.5 years, he came in with a new hematogenous infection with the streptococci. The first one was a staphylococci. In this case, I removed, it was very fast, I removed everything except for the CPS, and she's now, and got her antibiotics, a temporary spacer, put in new implants, and she's now, I think, about 1.5 years afterwards, feels good, SED rate and CRP are normal. So if it's ingrown, I have now 4 patients who had an infection with an ingrown CPS, in which I keep that, don't remove it, and try to solve the infection with the debridemar, antibiotics, and temporary spacer, or sometimes immediately. So what we expect and what we usually see, that's in the weeks following the implantation, some faint periosteal reaction which comes very gradually thicker and thicker. And at 1 year, most of the time it's almost stable. And when it's stable, it remains stable in the years afterwards. I should put in maybe one of 10 years, but it's the same. It stays the same at that ground plate against the bone. That evaluation, that's what my colleague Friedel Sinhaver has done over the years, and until recently a lot of work, and made the graphs this night also, is that we gradually see, especially the first 6 months, that there is an increase in thickness of the bone, of the width of the bone at the bone implant interface, and then gradually from about 1 year it starts to become stable. There has been a change. I think I used it from 2005. Before that, it was without hydroxyapatite. From 2005, it's with hydroxyapatite, because a lot of implants was for cementless use. Everyone asked me, well, you should introduce hydroxyapatite. So now it's available, and I think it's regular now. And we look at the figures. It's very preliminary, and it's not the same groups. The light blue is the evolution without hydroxyapatite, or older ones. And the darker blue is with hydroxyapatite. It doesn't speed up the ingrowth, seemingly, but we have to maybe have larger groups, should go for statistical analysis, and so on and so on. But certainly it doesn't do wonders. So technique still remains the high thing to remember. And what we've heard yesterday, maybe it's not unusual that hydroxyapatite, maybe it blocks a little bit that contact between titanium and the bone. Now, what happens in the immature skeleton? We know that because if you have a fracture in a boy of 10 years and it's a little bit angulated and shortened, don't worry, it will heal and it will remodel. What will remodel? What will we see in younger patients in which we put such a compressive force? That's at 2 years. And I have to say that, I don't know if there's a pointer on this one. Yes. I had that centering sleeve, but we see some kind of osteoporosis. Although over here it stays stable, we see some thickness of the bone over here, and we see the widening. It was 12 years and a half when it was implanted. That's at 2 years after implantation. We see that, and now he is full grown. It's more than 10 years now. Now we see that it's that distance between that centering sleeve and the bone has become different. The other thing is that you see the widening of the bone also in upgrowing children. Normal situations, we also see this in this situation, which means that if you ever have to remove those pins, you don't get them out, they are buried. That's also one of the reasons that I asked to Biomet to give me a pin inserter which allows me to leave 4 millimeters out, and I use that in younger patients, and you see it over here, so there are 4 millimeters. The other ones I have to calculate, of course, in the measuring, but I can leave them a little bit longer out. That's at 1 week. It's a special prosthesis, a growing prosthesis, because she was only 10 years. And I wanted to start the, after finishing of the chemotherapy, I had lengthened her about 1 centimeter during the surgery, and I had to start with some lengthening because I wanted to go in front of it at about 12 months. So I was a little bit afraid when we were at 11 months. I said, I don't know what's going to happen, we'll see. But by just lengthening it, it's a mechanical system, maybe we even increase the force, and that's 6 months after that lengthening. So it was maybe due to the chemotherapy, it was delayed a little bit, but then it very nicely hypertrophied and was very stable. Once again, see how the bone thickens, but I still can see my pins, and I want to not completely have them in the medullary canal after 5 years. So she has had 2 lengthening procedures, and she is doing well with the CPS. Unfortunately, she has had a lung metastasis, so she had neurochemotherapy surgery, but she is doing well now for the moment also. You're getting more experience, getting the more availability of the shorter anchor plug. We've seen it already yesterday also from Dr. O'Donnell. We can even lengthen our resection. This was a tall man, and it was a 40 centimeter resection. And I knew from previous patients that I could do without any problem 30 with the standard long, if you want to know it, if you want to call it, anchor plug and spindle. I used a short one because I wanted to have my pins in somewhat thick or cortical bone. But that's at shortly after implantation, 1 or 2 weeks. That's at 2 years, wonderfully, no problem at all. It works even with long resection. It's an OSS of 40 centimeter. It broke shortly after this X-ray. It broke at the taper over here. So I had to revise everything except for the CPS. So he had a fatigue fracture, seemingly of that taper, and it seems to be one of the very odd ones and not happening before. So now I will start to use a short anchor plug if I can as a standard one. That's the last one I did a few weeks ago, and it's she is 13 or something like that, so I use the standard 2 millimeters out. I have seen that. I've told you normally it should be cortical bone. This one was a Ewing sarcoma, intercalary, custom-made prosthesis, but we wanted to have, we saw some spots over here, we wanted to keep the growth plate to have him his length, and we managed to do it with a short anchor plug. He doesn't show any signs of local recurrence of metastasis at this time, and he's about 1.5 years later. That's at 3 months. And then after finishing his chemotherapy, he has a normal growth. Once again, he has a remodeling of his bone, which means that the long pins, I have to go back, I need it over here to get my ankle plug fixed. It's going up, and seemingly there is some kind, although it's a little bit stepped, there seems to be a normal metaphysical remodeling of the bone. So at one day those pins will be too long. I don't know what's going to happen, if I have to remove them or cut them, or I say, well, leave them in. We'll see what, for the moment we leave them in and see what happens. So it works. I was very keen to see the presentation before me. Now I'm standing afterwards. I also think that the rotational stability, if we have it, is very, very, very important in the beginning until ingrowth. Then you don't have to worry about forces anymore. The moment you have ingrowth, it stabilizes itself. But all the failures I had, all the 6 ones, were with the distal femoral replacement with the knee. Were all without rotation pins, and most of them were 600 pounds. So we have had also 3 patients, 2 young girls who sit on a chair, fainted, and were locked seemingly with their foot around one of the chair legs, and they rotated, and their leg was 30-degree rotated. All 4 of them had surgery very soon, and derotation and fixation. Only one finally developed a late, non-uniform, and had to revise. The other ones healed without a problem. And once you have that stable ingrowth, we haven't seen nor measured any changes over longer time, even 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So similarly, if you achieve osseointegration, it will last for a very long time. Thank you very much.